good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's symbolic expression, we have with us Ms. Manisha, who is going to translate the lecture in sign language. The topic for discussion today is C. Wright Mill's Sociological Imagination. This sociological imagination is a perspective in sociology which will help us understand the discipline of sociology and the responsibility that sociologists have. So to start, we know that individuals in their everyday life are trapped with their personal problems, with the kind of issues that they have in their life, with their families, with their relations with people, and also in terms of the individual experience in society. Now, how do individuals make sense of these problems? Do they connect themselves to the society or do they find themselves disconnected? So, C. Wright Mills would help us to understand the relation between individuals' personal experiences and the larger social milieu, which he uses to help us understand the discipline of sociology. So in everyday life, we know that sociology can be applied, can be effectively used to understand society. And therefore, we need to ask a question. How does sociology as a discipline helps us understand society? And therefore, the answer is that it is able to study both people and the social context. That implies individuals' biography, the social milieu or the context, and the history. So there is an interconnection between biography, history, and social structure. So this is what is the task of sociologists, to find the interrelation between the three domains. And to do this, sociologists often ask relevant questions and they find relevant answers to such questions. Therefore, we can say sociology offers a unique way of thinking about problems faced by individuals. The discipline enables us to understand the problem and provide multiple perspectives to understand the social problem in relation to the context in which the problem arises. So, in kind of a very particular way of looking at reality, and what C. Wright Mills does is gives us this concept of sociological imagination. What does the questions that comes to the mind of sociologists? There are three questions. Number one, what is the structure of society? When a sociologist asks such a question, the intention is to know how different groups are related to each other. Also, how people are related among themselves. Structure in sociology implies a network of relation. The second question is, what is the place of society in history? This question helps us to figure out how society changes over time. So social change is taking place and the structures are not static. It's undergoing changes. So how do we make sense of the changes taking place? And in order to understand the present, it's important to go back to the past. The third question is, what kind of people does society produce? So who we are is not only the result of our biology, but to a large extent of the socialization that we get. And that socialization is dependent with whom we interact, in which milieu are we, social milieu are we placed, and that kind of goes on to form the personality of an individual. So if we were to understand sociological imagination, we have to refer to C. Wright Mill's book the Sociological Imagination. It was a book written in the 1950s, and it was a kind of a period when there were a lot of changes taking place, and there was also the World War, post-World War II period and Cold War. So there were political kind of changes, as well as for the discipline of sociology, it was in its emergent stage. It was emerging. So these were these thinkers who were trying to figure out what exactly sociology meant or what was the subject matter. So sociological imagination is basically a perspective. It's a way of looking at reality. And how do we do that? We do that by placing ourselves within the social structure. So he kind of defined it as the practice of being able to think ourselves away from the familiar routines of our daily life to look at them fresh and with a critical eyes. So we just don't kind of stop by thinking that this is my personal problem. What we need to do is look into that problem from others' perspective. What would happen if the same problem was faced by someone else? And that will help us to understand that has the society contributed, or is it due to a multiple of factors and not only individual's own life. So the sociological imagination can be defined as an imagination to see things socially, and the most important is to understand the interaction between the self and society, how the individual is influenced by the social structure, and in return the structure is influenced by individual's action. So this ability becomes central to sociology because it will enable to develop a particular way of looking at reality. The sociological imagination is kind of also helping us to understand that the problems faced by an individual within a social structure is also influenced by a particular historical circumstances of that particular society. So history becomes very significant. Every individual lives his or her life in a particular society within a historical circumstances, and these historical circumstances influence what the individual becomes. So we can say that people are shaped by the society. They contribute to the formation of the society and to the course of history. Now, once we have understood what is sociological imagination, the next is to understand the context in which this text was produced, because we are talking about context, social milieu, history. If C. Wright Mill was able to write such a text, it had to be influenced by his social political milieu in which he was placed. So we know that his intellectual development was influenced by post-World War II and by the post-war new left in Britain, which was opposed to Western capitalism and Soviet totalitarianism. Both of these perspectives or ideology was not kind of something which was to be opposed or to be put pole apart. Mills suggested for a mid-path. So neither could capitalism be an answer to all, nor could the totalitarianism. He rather got kind of disillusioned by the Soviet totalitarianism after the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, when the uprising in Hungary was suppressed by Soviet army. And he was convinced that now, it is the people, individuals intellectuals, scholars who had to play an important role in politics. So that is the connect, that we cannot kind of stay away from what is happening in the larger context. So individuals, if they had to bring about a change in the society, they had to take part in a larger political process. So C. Wright Mills was writing at a point of time of post-World War America, and this was a time when there was a kind of a divide between the Soviet Union-led socialist world and the free or the led capitalist world of USA. And even within America, there were various kinds of ancillary industries developing, and these were like marketing agencies, advertising, public relation, opinion machinery. And there was a time that sociology was getting driven towards opinion side, towards kind of polling, doing survey. And C. Wright Mills was disturbed by the way in which sociology as a science was developing. In that context, C. Wright Mills felt that social sciences was being transformed into a particular fashion, and he wanted to go back to the classical imagination of social science and bring back the human and liberal perspective, the democratic vision of social science. He wanted to bring back the critical link that links kind of connect social sciences and society. So C. Wright Mills was of opinion that the task of sociologist is not to collect quantifiable data, was not to kind of do a lot of polling and surveys, but to critically examine the social problems that were existing in society. And that would be possible with both freedom and reason. So he was very critical of the way in which the social science disciplines were improving or progressing. Therefore, he kinds of emphasizes on the importance of theory. He brought back the importance of theory and social responsibility. Social responsibility is the kind of the responsibility of every sociologist or a research scholar who is wanting to kind of bring about change in the society. And what is the responsibility as a social scientist? It becomes very relevant in today's contemporary society, where we see n number of issues, problems disturbing both individual and society. So it is this time, the contemporary time, the rise of pragmatism. Everything is judged with tangible benefits, and there the society, the collective has to be re-emphasized. One has to think about how one can contribute to the society rather than just going by benefits and numbers. C. Wright Mills argued that we have to go beyond the social problems, because who defines the social problem? It's not the politicians, not the bureaucrats, neither the research institutes. It is to be defined by the social scientist. And how will the social scientist define the social problem? Only when he or she is able to develop a sociological imagination. So why is it important to develop the imagination? Number one, it allows people to understand their own personal experience, and that too place it within the social milieu and the history in which the individual is born. So we need to understand that if an individual, for say example, a woman is facing the problem of marital dispute on trying to kind of file a case for divorce, one needs to imagine the personal problem and understand that this problem is also due to several other changes taking place. Change in gender relation, change in legal ways in which problems are kind of more institutionalized, change in terms of education of women, larger participation of women in the workforce. So we need to kind of connect the personal issue with the larger public context. The sociological imagination helps us to recognize the responses available by becoming aware of many individuals who share or do not share the situation and response. So we go back to the issue of divorce. We know that post-industrialized society, the number of divorce cases has gone high. So there is a kind of a sharing of the problem by a number of men and women. The third importance of sociological imagination is that it helps individual to resist destructive forces and to change society for better. Now there is a possibility that individual kind of puts the blame of the personal problem on society and starts kind of taking criminal or violent behavior towards other. Now, once we are able to develop a sociological imagination and understand that the personal problem is a public issue, there will be a resistance to any kind of deviance or violent behavior. According to C. Wright Mills, the sociological imagination is more than a theoretical concept. It is kind of a promise. That is the first chapter of the book, where he says that the promise that individual's life is how you kind of take on the problem, that is issues which are in everyday life, and act on it depending on the response from the society. So you are not going to think about any kind of an issue as an individual experience, but connect it to what is happening around them. Mill, in his essay, states that sociological imagination helps us to understand each individual according to the background, lifestyle, habits, and tradition. It allows us to understand the influences society may have on a person and how historical events led to it. So it kind will help individual to place the problem that is being faced and kind of problematize it, because it is not faced by one individual but by a number of individuals. And therefore, once it is placed in the public or the social milieu, then the responsibility of the sociologist is try to critically examine the social structure, changes taking place, what are the connections with institutions, with other social structure that has led to the problem. And by doing such a kind of a analysis, the sociologist will then be able to understand the cause of the issue and try to provide solution. Now we have understood the what is sociological imagination, why we need such an imagination. Now most important part is to understand the themes or some of the key concepts used by C. Wright Mill. The first is trouble versus issues. Both trouble and issues have to do with crisis or a perception of danger and threat in the mind of change. But troubles have to do with personal life. It's a personal problem, something that happens to individual. whereas issues have to do with crisis in public life, something that happens to an institution. Sociology, in Mill's understanding, is able to connect between the two. In other words, sociology helps individuals see how personal troubles are also related to social issues. If we do a kind of an understanding of personal troubles and public issues, we see trouble occur within an individual life, a crisis in one's life. It could be, say, unemployment, divorce, some kind of violence, any issue, and within the range of individuals' relation with other. Public issues happens beyond the individual, especially it is kind of part of the outer life of an individual. Second, personal troubles are private matter. Since it happens to an individual, it is to be part of the inner life. It has to do with oneself. Public issues are matter of the collective. It has to do with the larger social system and historical process. Third, solutions for personal trouble comes from individual decision. If I am facing a problem, I will take a personal decision regarding it. Whereas in the public issue, the solution will not come from individual. It will come from the larger structure. And that is why the next theme is milieu versus structure. A milieu is something which is very immediate, the immediate social situation. So in the case of the divorce, a milieu in the marriage or the family is the personal conflict between husband and wife. But when we look into the structure, it is the larger social structure. It could be due to change in employment, change in education, change in legislations, and so forth and so on. So again, sociology helps us to connect the biography with the social structure. It kind of connects the micro with the macro. And therefore, we will be able to understand that the sociological imagination is just not a methodological tool. It is a mindset. It helps us. It's not necessary that only scholars and thinkers kind of have an imagination. Anyone can have an imagination, which is different from common sense. But what is required is to be able to construct a connection between the personal problem and larger social issue. So with this whole understanding of sociological imagination as a sociological perspective, we will be able to understand C. Wright Mill's contribution to sociology. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.